we often put athletes on a pedestal where we feel that they have to be really mentally strong, they have to be physically strong, they need to be motivated, they need to be focused. We often put them in this very high standards, but we often forget that they're human beings, end of the day. They have a life outside of sport. Also, they have their own emotions they're dealing with. They have their own environments that they're dealing with. So I think this is a huge aspect that if they need to be performing at their peak and they have to go out there every day and put in the kind of efforts that they put in, they need to be mentally safe and mentally well to go out there and be at that position. So I think, again, going back to emotional safety, I think that is key if they need to go out there and perform at the levels that they're performing at.
When we suppress emotions and what have you, it's like a bottleneck, and some people can feel it physically. Some people, it'll influence the way they train, their motivation and things like that. Personally, have you come across that at all yourself, and maybe where it's affected your mental health?
Yeah, for sure. If I talk about my personal journey and I talk about being in environments, I think everyone who's part of the sporting field, I think it comes with a lot of passion, it comes with a lot of drive. And when you don't believe like you truly belong to an environment that you're trying to serve and make a difference to, and it's against your values and your beliefs, I think it surely has an impact. It has an impact on your mental well-being. It has an impact on your physical well-being and the whole social environment. It has an impact on your whole environment. And I think that's why the feeling of emotional safety over here is so important to try and actually make the difference that you're trying to make. So yeah, I have felt it before. I have felt it in the past. And that's when I realized that I have to be part of environments that truly match my values and my beliefs, and part of environments that I truly belong in.
Welcome back to another episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, episode 291 as it stands. That's right, we're edging closer to the 300 mark. I'm your host, David Charlton, and today we're travelling from the bustling streets of New Delhi to the sporting heartland of Loughborough and taking in some Premier League knowledge too from some grounds in the London area. We've got a great guest joining us today. So yeah, please do say hello to Gayatri Bhushan. Not only is Gayatri a registered sport and exercise psychologist with the HCPC, but she's also a former national level runner from India. She's going to go on to share her journey into the field of sport psychology, her mission, and we'll also talk about regulatory bodies, rigorous standards for psychology, support systems, cultural nuances, and equality, diversity, and inclusion policies in sports. It's a really interesting conversation. Enjoy. If you can just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your interest in sports psychology.
Yeah. Hi, David. Thank you for having me. So my name is Gayatri Bhushan and I belong to India. I live in New Delhi. And a little bit about myself. I went to Loughborough University in the UK. I was based in London for the last 6 years. And I'm an HCPC registered sport and exercise psychologist. My journey goes back when I was 6 years old, when I decided to get into sport. My dad was a former national champion, 800 meters. So he's the one who pushed me a little bit into sport. And I was an athlete. I used to run 400 meters at the national level in India. And I think going back to that time and connecting that to sports psychology and how I decided to get into this field was the time when I needed help. And I think when I was around the age of 13, 14, when I couldn't handle the pressures that came along with sport and the expectations and the anxieties and the stress, and when I needed help and I went all over looking for that help along with my parents, and I couldn't, unfortunately, get the right support, I think that's when my little mind and my little brain made that decision that I would never want another athlete or a young girl like myself to have to give up something that they love so much because the lack of or no access to maybe the support or the mental health and the well-being side of things. So I think that's when I made the decision to get into this side of things. And I think that's been my journey so far.
Obviously, you've moved across to the UK, lived in Loughborough, and you've lived in the London area as well. Do you want to just talk about that side of things to start with, and your background, some of the challenges that you might have faced personally?
Yeah, I think UK was absolutely brilliant. I think being at Loughborough, I think it's the hub of sport, everything sport, whether it's the individuals that you're studying alongside, the professors, the whole environment. I think that was absolutely brilliant. Unfortunately, it was during COVID time, so I couldn't get the best of everything. But I think no complaints. I think I've had a brilliant journey so far, whether in Loughborough or whether in London, working for some of the best Premier League clubs in the world. I think my journey has been absolutely brilliant. So yeah, no complaints with regards to that. It was a really, really good journey, and I think I've learned a lot being in the UK.
Go and tell the listeners a little bit more about the learnings and what have you learned? And
I think if I have to look back at my time in the UK and I have to think of maybe my top three key learnings, I think I would firstly talk about the value of regulations and standards. That unfortunately is something that is missing in my home country, and that is something that has taught me a lot about policies, about procedures, about following standards, about the recognition, about the accreditations and the routes that you need to follow to be where you are. I think that has been a great learning for me in the UK, and that is something that I would like to implement back home in India too with the athletes that we serve. So that has been a great learning for me. Another key learning would have been the power of integrated support, about the support systems that actually build an athletes and how they contribute to an athlete's life. That has been something that I have seen. And that brings me to my third point, which has been lived experiences, working for the best in the world, with whether they've been the Olympic pathways, whether they've been football clubs, Premier League football clubs that I worked for. I think nothing compares to lived experiences and being in that environment. And UK has given that to me, and London has given that to me. Loughborough has given that to me. So that is something that I would really, really like to just mention over here. And at last point, I think I would like to mention is the cultural nuances that come with sport, and how there are different identities, different gender, different cultural aspects, and different minorities that come, and how sport plays such a huge role in trying to integrate all of these aspects. So I think these have been my key learnings in the UK, and that's what I brought back with me to India.
we'll get to the cultural piece in a moment and some of the things that you learned and you came across it in the UK. I'm intrigued though where you talk about the first point about the pathways, the accreditation, that side of things. So yeah, how different is it then in India? Because there's plenty of people out there calling themselves sports psychologists. Do they go through the same rigorous process as you have, or is it very different?
No, unfortunately, in India, there is no regulatory body and there is no framework that actually protects our athletes and or any kind of equity in sport. So there is no government framework that actually protects the title of a sport and exercise psychologist in India. So anyone can call themselves a sports psychologist and they can't be sued for it. And there's no law that protects the title. So that is very different from the framework that I have functioned in the UK and the HCPC regulations. And so that is very different from what it is in India, unfortunately.
So is it fair to say you may well have some ex-athletes, some former coaches who've read a couple of books and they're calling themselves sports psychologists? How different would that be to your pathway then, and what you learned, and was it an easy route, the route that you've taken?
So no, I wouldn't say it's been an easy route, but it has been very fulfilling. So I personally did my bachelor's in psychology. Then I had to do my master's in sport and exercise psychology. And then I did a training accreditation route, which is called SEPIT, which is the Sport and Exercise Psychologist in Training route with the Chartered Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences, which took me about 3 years to complete. So it's been a long journey where my education has spanned a good 8 to 9 years. But unfortunately, in India, people do end up doing their bachelor's degree or master's degree in no specific subject, and they do end up calling themselves sports psychologists, which I look back upon and think that they aren't to be blamed completely. Unfortunately, the government does not have a regulatory body to protect the title, like I mentioned. And when I talk about my journey and I talk about whether if it's been easy, no, I don't think it's been easy, because me being an Indian passport holder and coming to the UK, unfortunately for my education, I've had to pay 3 times the amount of what my British or my EU peers would have paid for their education, for the same education and training in psychology over the last 6 years. So that is a barrier that I see. And that is why I see that so many people around the world don't actually get the right titles and the right accreditation when they're trying to make a career in sports psychology.
It's difficult, isn't it, when every country say they've got their own little routes, haven't they, and accreditations and qualifications and so on. I mean, I guess as far as the CPAR qualification goes and the things that you've learned, as we're both well aware, equality, diversity is one of the things where you can spend quite a large chunk of your time and you're given additional training in that respect. So yeah, I'm keen to move things forward and start talking about this. So I'm curious, how do you think your background in general, be that in the UK, Middle East, India, goes on to influence your chances of progressing in sport? And that might be as a player, an athlete, or even as a coach as well.
Like I think I've mentioned before, I think I see that in a lot of countries. I see that your postcode often matters more than your potential. And I've seen that in India. I've seen where you come from and your background. It actually has a huge influence on how you access sport and the kind of inclusivity. If your systems aren't inclusive, your background becomes a barrier before your talent becomes visible. And that is something that I have unfortunately seen. So, to answer your question, how your background would affect access to sport, I think it shapes how you're supported. Your background, it shapes how you're seen, how you're valued, whether that's as a player or whether that's an individual behind the scene. And when I talk about more about the mental side of things and I talk about sports psychology, whether mental well-being is even considered part of the performance equation is something that comes with your background. In the UK, I still see sports psychology, mental well-being being a big part, and even EDI policies being a big part of organizations, being a big part of the academies that I've worked for. But unfortunately, in a lot of countries, this is still something that is not looked into. Mental performance, the EDI aspect of things, the policies that come with it, frameworks to protect your athletes, that is still something that's lacking in a lot of countries.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about the postcode idea that you've mentioned there? I'll share a little story from my past as well in this. Prior to being a sports psychologist, I worked in the travel industry, and I was a branch manager for a corporate travel company for a period, and did some work down in London. And I was once told by a very high ranking CEO in a company that I would never be successful. I'd never do very well simply because of my accent, the Northeast Geordie accent, which at the time I was absolutely furious about. And yeah, obviously it's stuck there because it happened a good few years ago. Have you come across little scenarios like that before?
Yeah, I think that has two sides of it. When you talk about the accent aspect of it, yes, coming from India, it hasn't been easy. I think the point of belonging, do you actually belong in that space that you're actually working for? Belonging is not only the physical aspect of it, being physically present, but it also means the emotional safety that comes along with being present in a room. So I think, yeah, when you talk about the accent aspect of it, the color of my skin, where I come from, my background, that has obviously played a role. The gender aspect of it, and in different countries, I think it has different connotations attached to it. The belonging aspect. But yeah, I have seen. But I also have a funny story to tell. So being the white aspect of it, my experience of working in, say, a football club, and how I've seen that a lot of individuals who come in, who we serve, even in the foundation aspect of it, a lot of them are minorities who may be South Asians or maybe Southeast Asians or individuals coming from different African countries. And they're actually individuals who want to deal with people who look like them, who want to talk to people who look like them. And the role model aspect comes into it. And the fact that the relatability factor comes into it. So a lot of these clubs might be predominantly white male, might have a predominantly white male population, but a lot of individuals who we serve are actually today talking about the fact that they don't have that connectedness or relatedness. So there's a lot of aspects involved to that, which I've seen.
In that respect, the clubs, the organisations who do maybe have what ADI policies in place, they also need to factor in that within their staffing that they've got a nice mix and balance, because these people can then relate better to to various different populations, if you like.
Yeah, 100%. I think the equality, the equity, the diversity has to go beyond just the policies. I think they have to, like you said, the staffing policies. I think there has to be a lot more relatability, even for the players and the athletes that we serve. There have to be a bit more connectedness in terms of the role models, in terms of the individuals that you're interacting with. So, yeah, I think this is something that needs to be looked into, even in the UK.
Yeah, no, it's interesting when you mentioned the word belonging there. That was going to be a question that I was going to ask. I've read a book called Belonging by a guy called Owen Eastwood, who related it quite a lot to sport, and he talks an awful lot about the in crowd, and then highlights, when we truly belong to something, or feel that sense of belonging, then performance is improved, we feel better about ourselves, mental health, team cohesion, accountability. Was the identity side of things, we feel we'll talk openly about the club or the organization, and we've got a real sense of pride there. That must be difficult if you're in situations where you just don't have that feeling, and you feel you're in the out group, if you like.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And like I said, it's just not about the physical presence, it's about the emotional safety that comes along with belonging. And I also feel that it's not always about being picked, it's actually more about being seen and about being valued. I've worked with athletes of color who are technically included in teams, but constantly feel like outsiders. And I've had such conversations, and the reasons might be the subtle cultural disconnect. And like I said, lack of role models. There aren't too many people who look like them, who talk like them, who eat the same food as them, who come from the same backgrounds and family backgrounds in them. So lack of role models also plays a huge role over here. And that again goes back to my point of the staffing policies, the people around you, the support systems around you, the people you actually get to talk to around you. So I see that with athletes. I see that they have to sometimes suppress parts of who they actually are to fit in. And that is something that I see a lot in sport with athletes.
Suppressing emotions isn't necessarily a good thing, is it? If there's an athlete listening to this who is in that situation, who does suppress emotions, what type of advice would you give them?
I think it's very important to talk about this to feel that emotional safety aspect of it. So I would suggest that they have to talk about it and be who you are. You matter. And that is something which I always talk about, that you matter and your presence matters. And what you bring to the table is not something that another individual can bring. And you should be proud of where you come from, your cultural background. Everyone's different. And I think the individual differences is what makes this so beautiful and the sporting world so beautiful. So I would say that this is something that you need to talk about, because if you want to perform at your peak potential and you want to perform and you want to be the best athlete, human being, individual that you potentially can be, this is something that you need to overcome and talk about. Is something that I would suggest to every athlete, every human being, and everyone in the performance field. Any high performing individual needs to be comfortable in their own skin and from where they come from in their background to be able to actually make the difference that they're trying to make.
When we suppress emotions and what have you, it's like a bottleneck, and some people can feel it physically. Some people, it'll influence the way they train, their motivation, and things like that. I don't know, like personally, have you come across that at all yourself, and maybe where it's affected your mental health?
Yeah, for sure. If I talk about my personal journey and I talk about being in environments, I think everyone who's part of the sporting field, I think it comes with a lot of passion, it comes with a lot of drive. And I think when you don't believe like you truly belong to an environment that you're trying to serve and make a difference to, and it's against your values and your beliefs, I think it surely has an impact. It has an impact on your mental well being, it has an impact on your physical well being and the whole social environment. It has an impact on your whole environment. And I think that's why the feeling of emotional safety over here is so important to try and actually make the difference that you're trying to make. So yeah, I have felt it before, I have felt it in the past, and that's when I realized that I have to be part of environments that truly match my values and my beliefs. and part of environments that I truly belong in. So that is something that, yes, I have felt before.
Yeah, I guess on this belonging theme, like if you don't feel like you belong, you probably feel like quite fragile internally, and you potentially communicate and behave in a fearful way, don't you? With the way that you come across. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of an athlete when you don't feel comfortable, which is proven tricky right now. but yeah, essentially, I suppose, yeah, you go to a training session, you're fearful about what somebody might say to you. You're probably going to be worried in case you're going to get picked out. So an awful lot of like shame and like negative emotions you're likely to experience.
Yeah, 100%. We often put athletes on a pedestal where we feel that they have to be really mentally strong, they have to be physically strong, they need to be motivated, they need to be focused. We often put them in this very high standards, but we often forget that they're human beings, end of the day. They have a life outside of sport. Also, they have their own emotions they're dealing with, they have their own environments that they're dealing with. So I think this is a huge aspect that if they need to be performing at their peak, and they have to go out there every day and put in the kind of efforts that they put in, they need to be mentally safe and mentally well to go out there and be at that position. So I think, again, going back to emotional safety, I think that is key if they need to go out there and perform at the levels that they're performing at.
It was really inspiring there to chat with Gayatri, and it took me back to the beginnings of this podcast, which I started 5 years ago in June 2020, and specifically the name of the podcast, Demystifying Mental Toughness. It's very sad to hear people step away from something they love doing due to a lack of guidance or support. For me, there's power in seeking support. And this episode emphasizes that mental toughness is still often misunderstood. Rather than being about suppressing emotions or going it alone, true mental toughness, true resilience, well, it's found in the courage to acknowledge challenges, to reach out, and then to have some honest conversations. And Gayatri's experiences studying and working in the UK, particularly in an environment as vibrant and as demanding as Loughborough University and the world of Premier League football, well, it reinforces this message. She speaks to the importance of community, of learning from peers and mentors, and of tremendous growth that does take place when we open ourselves up to guidance. Talking about mental health, whether we're elite athletes, coaches, psychologists, or anyone striving to achieve, it can enable us to gain perspective, to break free from isolation, and develop healthier coping mechanisms. As Gayatri points out, even those who appear strong, confident, and mentally tough, well, they're not immune to moments of self-doubt or vulnerability. In fact, it's often the most committed individuals who place the greatest demands on themselves, making support systems all the more essential. So to reiterate, I'd like you to consider what it means to be mentally tough. Strength lies not in silence, but in the willingness to share, to reflect, and to seek help. Whether you're navigating the challenges of sport, work, or life, opening up to someone you trust, a coach, a mentor, a psychologist, a teammate, a friend, a family member, it really can be transformative. So, some food for thought there. Next week, you'll be joined by a Gayatri again as we find out more about her journey and her thoughts on equality, diversity, and inclusion. Until then, if Gayatri's journey does resonate with you, or if you find yourself in need of support, remember you're not alone. Talking about these experiences, well, it's not a burden to others, it's a step towards growth and towards healing. We do invite you to reach out, share your story, ask any questions, or just simply connect. We can be contacted at info@sport-excellence.co.uk. Until next week, I hope you have a great week. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sport psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.